hear the music playing, you've come to the right place. Whether you are here because you have questions or seeking answers, or you have an encounter to tell, you have arrived. This is the Ropen Cryptozoology Network. I'm your host, Jacob Guerra, also in connection with the Ropen Radio Network. Welcome in. If you're joining me right now and you're wondering what this is all about, it's time to talk about it. This is actually my first airing on CCTV, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. But for the last 20 years, I've been researching and studying a phenomena. Before I get into that, though, what will we be doing here on this network? Well, we'll be talking about eyewitness encounters, not paranormal, but of cryptozoology. If you're wondering what cryptozoology is, it is the study of the hidden animal. Creatures presumed to be extinct that are being seen today, or creatures that should not be alive at all. The founders of this was in the mid-1900s, Ivan T. Sanderson, and I want to say Lauren Coleman. Apologize if I'm incorrect on that one, but I'm pretty sure. Now, we'll be discussing all-stars. If you're wondering what cryptozoology is, you're very new to it, the all-stars can be Sasquatch, the Loch Ness Monster. But in our case, with this network, we have chosen a different field to go into, and that is the Ropen. It is our mascot. What is the Ropen? Well, in PNG, Papua New Guinea, the natives there describe as seeing a nocturnal, smooth, leathery-skinned creature. They've nicknamed it the Demon Flyer and the name Ropen, which means also grave robber. I'm not going to go into too much, but I think you get the idea. Living pterosaurs. That's right. That's what we will be talking about most of the time, but we will be discussing other monsters around the world. So, there you have it. This network is for monster hunting and investigations. And surprising enough, there are a lot of people out there with eyewitness encounters that I believe it's important to tell their story and let them come forward and be heard. And if you want to do that, I promise you, you will receive no ridicule from me. There'll be no harsh judgment. I'm ready to believe you. Have any of you been to Texas? Well, I'm sure a lot of people out there have. All the viewers that could be chiming in, I'm sure you've been to Texas at least once or twice. The last time I was there was in 2010. I have a lot of family in Texas. Surprising enough, I never did any investigations out there. I really should have. This would have been an opportunity to meet some pretty amazing individuals who have a story or two to tell. One story, one encounter comes out of Texas. Jason McLean has decided to come forward with his encounter that happened to him near DeSoto, outside of DeSoto, probably west of Hampton. He had an encounter with a flying creature, Ropen pterosaur. And I think it's important to hear what he has to say. There's a lot of information here that Jason has that's going to probably fill your mind, and it's going to have you question things, and it's going to have you curious. That's fine. That's why we get to the bottom of these things. These are the investigations. We need to hear of these encounters, and we need to help spread the awareness that something truly is happening out there. But Jason has chosen to come forward and tell us his story. He is my eyewitness encounter today. We're going to have a chance to talk to him. I'm pretty excited about it. And let's go ahead and make a call to him, and let's hear what he has to say, and let's begin this network off on a high note. Here is Jason McLean with his testimony and his encounter.
This is Jason.
Jason, this is Jacob Guerra. You're on the network.
Hey, Jake. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you. I've been wanting to talk to you for quite a while now. I hear you have something you'd like to share with all of us, my viewers and others who are going to be seeing this around Oregon. And I really am grateful that you're allowing me to post that to CCTV as well.
Oh, no. Absolutely. Probably the best place to start for me was actually back in 1992.
Okay.
I was 11, 12 at the time. Actually, it was summer, so I would have been 11. Yeah, and we were, it was morning, about 11 o'clock. We had just finished up fishing in a 10-mile creek. It's in South Dallas, right? It's a suburb, actually, south Dallas, DeSoto, and the creek goes through several cities and connects to the Trinity. The Trinity River is the big river that really supplies all of the water for North Texas, right?
Mm-hmm.
But basically, North Texas sits on top of a giant limestone slab, right? I mean, just all of it. Well, the 10-mile, actually, it runs for 10 miles, so it's a very clever name. Anyway, it's cut about 15 to 20 feet into that limestone bedrock, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, the walls are sheer on either side, and so, it's a great place to go fishing. You don't even, if you're in it, you feel like you're out in the middle of nowhere, even though you're in a suburb of Dallas, Texas. But we're out there fishing. We just finished packing up, though, because it's getting, it's June, so it's starting to get hot. So we're heading back. My friend's already up the hill, and I'm just getting inside the tree line, leaving the creek when I hear a noise, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the sound of something that I've never heard before. I'm very familiar with all the things. I'm like, I wonder what that is. So I stop, I poke my head back out, only to see what I think for a moment is the biggest blue heron I've ever seen in my life. Wait, wingspan is 8 to 10 feet wide, easily, right? And it isn't until its right wingtip is literally 5 feet from my face that I realize I'm looking at a pterodactyl.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, I mean, because again, like I said, this was just a massive blue heron. The coloring was the same. It was flying the same way. It had its neck in sort of that S position that cranes often have when they fly, right? Cranes, pelicans, they all sort of do it. Mm-hmm. And but once that wingtip was right in front of my face, it's when I realized what I'm looking at was a creature that had no feathers, right? It was all this gray leathery skin, and more importantly, what I had thought were when a crane flies, sometimes it sticks its legs out behind it, right?
Right.
What I thought had been its legs sticking straight out behind it was, in fact, a long tail with a flange at the end, sort of a diamond shape flange at the end. And of course, as it's going, and now it's flying away, because we were on sort of straightaway. So the creek sort of snakes its way through Duncanville, DeSoto, Lancaster, and Wilmer Hutchins, and then hits the Trinity. Well, I was in a bit of a straightaway for like 100 yards, right? I'm about in the middle of it. So I get a good look at it as it's sort of coming, and then once it leaves, I realize what I'm looking at, I can watch it fly at banks again, and, to follow around. So I get a really good kind of overall look at this thing. But yeah, it was a ramphoractoid pterodactyl.
Okay. When you said ramphoractoid, so I'm guessing you're leading.
Ramphoractoid pterodactyl, yes.
Okay, so we're talking the Ramphorhynchus species, correct?
Right, or at least the family. Okay. Right. So let me actually probably go into a little bit of detail on that. Most people are familiar with the pteranodon, right? Mm-hmm. Which is a very specific species of dinosaur, or not even dinosaur. It's a reptile, right?
Right.
But that's what you saw in the Flintstones. That's what you always saw, right? Big. It was big. It had no tail. It has a large beak and a large crest, right? Well, the pterosaur family came in a lot of different flavors. Well, one of them were the ramphoractoids. The Ramphorhynchus is the species, or the animal specifically, that the entire family is sort of named after. And these were smaller pterosaurs that had long tails usually they had some form of flange on them. The name Ramphorhynchus means tooth-beaked. because they didn't actually have a beak per se. What they had was a very reptilian-like face, but they would have with a row of teeth. But the Ramphorhynchus specifically had a tooth that came out of the tip of its snout, right? So it sort of looked like a beak, but it wasn't. And that's, like I said, in general, it's a much smaller species than, say, the Pteranodon or the Quetzalcoatlus, which is the size of a giraffe.
Mm-hmm.
But they usually didn't have crests. Some did. But their main feature is that they usually had teeth, right, versus a beak, mm-hmm. and they had long flanged tails.
It's interesting you mentioned some of the variations with the Ramphorhynchoids. Now,
yes.
According to most paleontologists, they are saying that you can't have pteranodons with long tails. They had no tails, and you can't have maybe a Ramphorhynchus that has a crest along with a long tail, based on what they have found.
So there's sort of two problems with that entire theory, right? The entire concept is predicated on the idea that we found every species of these creatures that exist, right?
Correct.
And I don't know anyone who would say that we found every version of every pterosaur that exists. We find new things all the time.
Mm-hmm.
We've only found what we found. Now, it would be accurate to say we have no representatives like that, but even that's not entirely true. We have, I can't even pronounce it. I think it starts with this, like a Scapnathus, I believe, which was a Ramphorhynchoid, right? It was in the family, had a long tail and a flange, okay. But many paleontologists think it had a kind of a crest, right? Mm-hmm. Now, the thing is, the one I saw did not have a crest at all. But there are people who have seen them that have seen in this area and have said it had a crest. In fact, there's someone I know personally. So funny thing, once I came out with this, I started working on a book that should be out this fall. A friend of mine was like, "Hey, my wife saw that just a few years ago, and the one she saw was reddish in color, which is more common, but it had a crest." So the thing is that we have to realize is sort of twofold. One, there are Ramphorhynchoids that at least may have had a crest, right? We have found a few, but more importantly, that just because we haven't found it doesn't mean that it didn't exist back then, and it also doesn't mean that they couldn't exist now. Any creature that would have survived to present day would have adapted to the new environments, and there's no reason why a crest couldn't have been an adaptation, particularly if what we're seeing is a sexual dimorphism in the species. That's why we see some with and others without head crests and of slightly different colorations.
Notice that, just so you know, folks, notice that he said that they are evolving. Okay. No, did you say evolving, Jason?
Well, I
adapting.
Specifically said adapting, right? I mean, all creatures adapt to the environment, mm-hmm. and regardless of when you believe that these creatures supposedly went extinct, there's been significant climatological changes that they would have had to have adapted to. So if they have survived to our time, then they've probably adapted and changed to exist within this modern world.
Absolutely. The difference between adapting versus evolving.
Right. So here's the thing, right? I have no problem using the word evolve to a point. I think the problem is we have a blending of terms. If you look at the theory of what I would call Darwinism or Darwinian evolution, where you start with something less advanced and then it becomes more advanced over time, that's one use of the word. The other more common use is basically adaptation. Is basically adaptation into a new species or subspecies, from one to another. Like what we see. Well, like again, I think his observation on the finches were 100% correct. Right? You have a finch that then becomes, as it adapts, it becomes new subspecies, and so you have them evolving into different subspecies of finch. That's what I think is happening. You have, it is adapting to become probably even a new species altogether. And that's what we've seen with these. I think probably a lot of cryptids actually fall into that category where, and they may be known, or a creature that is known to paleontology, but because we don't really know what they looked like, not really, right? And B, they have adapted and evolved to fit a new climate. I think a lot of these creatures just seem they seem less familiar than what we think that they really are.
Right. Absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, for me, I would say I think adaptation or adapting is probably better, but I have no problem using either. But I don't believe that this is something new. I think this is something old. I think whatever I saw and whatever many people around Dallas, the Dallas-Fort Worth area and other places are seeing are remnants of an ancient pterodactyl, pterosaur that has over time adapted to our new world, and they're apparently at least successful enough to have a breeding population.
Yeah. This is where others come in to have skepticism about this, is because they say, okay, if you've seen one, there has to be a colony in order to survive. Well, obviously there is, because people are seeing them everywhere. But they would argue the fact that if you're seeing it, I should be seeing it. Well, not necessarily. Have you spent most of your life outdoors? I mean, more people, the people who have spent their time outdoors have a greater chance than we do who live in the city. But even then, when you venture out of the city, you still have a great chance, depending where you are.
Yeah. Well, and so here's the thing, particularly with this, right? Like, unlike some other cryptids, which, indicate, like, there's some who will claim that Sasquatch is extremely intelligent, and that's possible. I don't think these are necessarily hiding like that. I do think that what we're looking at, though, is a combination of an endangered species level small population, right? I think that's the first part. The second part is I do think that they are mostly nocturnal.
Yeah.
I think that is a huge aspect of this. They are mostly nocturnal, so people don't see them. I think they don't fly very high, and I leave open the possibility, though, for thunderstorms. I think there's some reason to believe that they do gain greater heights during thunderstorms, but that's just a theory. I think by and large they are gliding. They are not, and they are riding air currents. I don't think they're getting very high, so I think they're basically kind of at treetop level, which is why most people don't even see them. They're flying at night. But I think the third major, or I guess maybe not the fourth, and I think the final and probably biggest aspect of it, the reason people don't recognize them or see them is that the one I saw, like I said, I had to get 5 feet from this thing to see it for what it was, right? If it had been flying maybe a different direction or just far enough out, I may have written the entire thing off as it's just a really big heron, right? And the thing is, literally every person I have spoken to who has seen them in the area, and this is pretty common across the board, is everyone's like, well, at first I thought it was a heron or a pelican or something of that nature, right? Everyone has said it. And so I think because of the shape that they're in, right? As far as when they fly, I think they look so much like herons that I think most people just don't see them. They just like, oh, it's just another crane, and they go off. Because again, the one I saw was sort of a bluish gray, right, like a Payne's gray.
Okay.
So it again was so smooth that unless you really looked at it, you wouldn't necessarily notice that it wasn't a heron. And I think that's the big problem here. Is most people, I think a lot of people are seeing them way more often, but they don't recognize them for what they were. You have to really look at them. Everyone, I mean, just across the board had said, I thought it was a pelican, or I thought it was a crane or a heron, but then I got a better look at it. Well, what if, if you're not taking that better look, then you're not going to see it and recognize it for what it is.
Absolutely. Now, here's the thing, though, Jason. When they're seeing it, I mean, you should be able to identify that it is featherless, correct? Especially when
Correct.
it's close to you. But you're saying that they can just dismiss it because, hey, that's not what I'm seeing. I'm seeing probably a crane or a heron. That's what you believe?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Oh, absolutely. Because that's what I tried to do for better than 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize how much of it. It's only looking back that I realized the impact this thing had on my, this sighting had on my life.
I was going to say.
But yeah, but it's like for 25 plus years, I just told myself that I didn't see what I saw. And here's the weird thing: even at the time, I believed that there were living dinosaurs. I'll just throw everything out here. I'll just play all my cards at once. I have always been a young Earth creationist. Okay. I believe that there are dinosaurs walking the Earth because people have seen them. I absolutely was like, yeah, these things are real. But I was in a suburb of Dallas, Texas. That's not where you see these things, right?
Right, that is.
You don't see these things in Dallas, Texas. You see them in, like, the Congo or Papua New Guinea. You see them, in some far-off place. You don't see them in one of these, in like one of the largest conurbations in the country, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, this is not where these things are. And so I firmly believed for 25 years that I had to have been wrong. Even after I met, I'd even written a book on them, but more from a historical, artistic standpoint. We can talk about that later. Okay. But after I had personally met Ken Gerhard, and he was a friend at that point, I didn't tell him. It wasn't until Lyle Blackburn was like, hey, we're doing a little thing, and if you have any stories of swamp monsters, and I was just being just being me. I was like, hey, does a pterodactyl in a creek count? And he's like, actually, we're doing an entire episode on pterodactyls in southern Oklahoma, so that'd be great. And I'm like, you're doing a what on what? and so it wasn't. And they let me see a bunch of their other stuff, and I'm like, holy cow! There was a guy who in southern Oklahoma, and he made a model. Like, he didn't have the tail, right? But he did the same. It was like the head was doing the same thing, and overall looked like a crane, just with the and the neck, the head, the whole thing. And I'm like, he saw what I saw, and he's in southern Oklahoma, which is not that far away from where I am. Mm-hmm. So it's one of those things where even when I became aware of the situation of these creatures existing, it was always like the Rio Grande Valley, and all these others. I still couldn't believe they were in my neck of the woods until I found out that they were. And then all of a sudden, like, I found there was a person in my church who had seen one at night. Oh, wow. It flew right next to her car. Another guy had actually saw maybe ostensibly the same one twice when he was coming home from a late night shift, right? And so it's one of those things where I think people are seeing them a lot more often, but like I said, it has to be the right combination of events to recognize what you're seeing. But I think unless you get a great look at them, I think it's real easy to write it off as, no, I saw a crane, because I know that's what I did. It took a lot for me to accept that's what I even saw.
Yeah.
But I think, you throw the average person who doesn't who has been told their entire lives these things went extinct 65 million years ago and that they aren't alive today, and the traditional Darwinian worldview that we're fed, I think a lot of people are like, nope, couldn't have possibly seen that. I must have missaw it.
Right. Misidentification.
That's exactly what's happening.
Yeah. I've even listened to a gentleman who, you mentioned the S-shaped like a heron, okay? Usually it's the herons that have the S-shaped. The gentleman I was listening to, he insisted there's no way pterosaurs could have moved their neck like that. Really? Is he absolutely positive of that? Has he done his own investigations on it? Is he a paleontologist? This was just a skeptic. And, again, that's just an assumption versus going out and doing the actual investigation of it. I am familiar with... I'm familiar with Ken...
No, please.
Yeah, Ken Gerhardt is a native to Texas, isn't he? Or native to Texas. Yeah, I'm familiar with his work, and I remember he was featured in some episodes on TV and even some of the news broadcasts over there too, where he had been saying, I do believe there's a large variety of birds, prehistoric birds, if you will, that have survived. So I guess the question I may have is about Ken Gerhardt, since you're familiar with him. Has he become a believer in creation? Is he in creation ministries?
No, not. Let me rephrase this. That is not my understanding of the situation.
Okay.
I think he's still again. I won't speak for him, but from our conversations, I don't think that he has. I think he just is more open to the possibility of these creatures existing today. I would say for me, I got into all this sort of accidentally, but for me, I believe I sort of see myself as a holistic researcher, right? Like there's not enough on any one creature to really specialize in, so I tend to be a journalist anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe that all of these things, whether it's forbidden archaeology, right, or cryptozoology, ufology, I think all of these things are pieces to the puzzle of life itself. What we need and what we're ultimately all looking for is a worldview that accounts for all things.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, that's what cryptozoology is. It's my personal exploration of the world around us, looking for a better worldview. What is the thing that looks the most like what we're actually seeing? And the more I look, the harder I look, the more the Bible becomes the best worldview that I've found. Mm-hmm. It's one of those things where if you take its teaching seriously, then the worldview it presents is the world that we're seeing. Now, don't get me wrong, there are people who have, I think, misunderstood aspects of it. I think there's definitely some wiggle room in a few places here and there that I think that we can argue and flesh out. But by and large, I think where most people would look at that and say, okay, this is the overall biblical worldview that I think most creationists or Christians, would sort of agree with. Mm-hmm. It's like then if you were to game out what the world would look like, that's what we see, right? And a perfect example of that would be, okay, let's again from the broadest standpoint, the idea is that the Earth is a created thing that was designed to contain life. It had a perfect state, but then suffered a cataclysmic event that radically altered and changed the environment. We see things like humans going from living 900 years to less than 100 years. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that is indicative of a massive climactic change. Well, what would you game that out as, right? Okay, so that means pre-flood or pre-cataclysm, right, however you want to say it. You would expect in a perfect environment that you would see a wide diversity of life, that it would be robust, that it would be plentiful, and that it would be healthier and like I said, more robust than what you would find post. In fact, what you would expect to find is a massive reduction in overall species and in their robustness. Well, that's precisely what we find. We find a huge variety of fossilized life, right? It's all kinds of different creatures all over the place. Some are small, but some are much larger. The things that we have today are they clearly have predecessors that we find in the fossil record, but they're significantly less. A great example is the glyptodont, right? It was basically an armadillo the size, which is something, armadillo is something I know about being native Texan.
Of course.
But the glyptodont was an armadillo the size of a Volkswagen Bug. Okay, the biggest armadillo you're going to find is, the size of maybe a full-size Chihuahua, right? Maybe a little bit bigger. That's not, there's a difference there. Look at the sea turtles. You have, again, sea turtles the size of minivans, whereas the biggest sea turtle today is about 6 foot long. You have the Deinosuchus, which is basically just a giant crocodile that's identical to any crocodile you'll find today, except for the fact that, it's like 6 times the size. The megalodon, right? It's just a giant great white shark. There you have Komodo dragons, again, the size of a bus. Well, it's like everything we find, ground sloths, teratorns, it doesn't matter. Name an animal that exists today. There's a predecessor in the fossil record that is absolutely breathtakingly massive by comparison, right?
Yep.
We would also then expect that there would be survivors from that period that didn't change, didn't really adapt to become something new. And those creatures would look very odd to us. And I think that's when we start finding other cryptids, right? That's when you start finding things like these ramphoractoid pterodactyls, which I think traditionally have been called wyverns or a type of dragon.
Cockatrice, basilisk.
Yeah, exactly. Differing. These are all differing. In fact, personal theory of mine is that the cockatrix is actually a theropod that has survived. It's only been within the last 20 to 30 years that we've even started to realize that many theropods had feathers, right? Mm-hmm. Well, the cockatrix was a dragon that had the upper body of a chicken, but then had the rest of the body of a dragon. Well, if you lived 2,000 years ago, right, and you're in Persia or in India, what do you call an oviraptor? The thing even has a beak and a head crest, but it's clearly not a chicken, right? I mean, there's any number of theropods where it's like, yeah, I mean, how would you describe it? It's like, well, it was a dragon, but it had feathers like a chicken. Okay, I mean that's what it is. Mm-hmm. So I think if you look very carefully, we find dragons that have we can find an equivalency in the Dinosauria world that it indicates that there were survivors. Now I think that again we tend to forget that climate's changed radically over the last 2,000 years alone. In fact, I think a lot of things that happened 1,000 years ago, like the Maunders minimum, I think drove a lot of these creatures into extinction, which is why we haven't seen them. But by and large, and we see that in the literature, right? There were bestiaries which were basically like what we considered an encyclopedia for animals, right? Mm-hmm. As late as the 17 and 1800s. That still had dragons in them, and they said, but that they were exceptionally rare at that point, right?
Absolutely.
So it's one of those things where there were creatures that absolutely we found that match one-to-one. Now, there are a species, like the tassel worm, which basically looks like a giant, it looks like a snake with legs, is really what it looks like. They're just much larger. It's like those we haven't really quite found those. And again, how much of that is accurate, we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But the simple fact is, by and large, we can find one-to-one correlation for most dragons, most of them. And I think that fit into the worldview that once you game it out, it's like, this is exactly what you'd expect to see, right? From a biblical perspective. So, like I said, for me, cryptozoology is one of several pathways to understand the world around us in a broader sense, and it just matches up best with what I see from a creationist standpoint than, say, a Darwinian perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, none of these things make sense from a Darwinian perspective, but they do from a creationist standpoint.
Absolutely. Jason, let's go back to your encounter for a moment here.
Sure.
So when you saw it, tell me again how close you were to it.
When it first came around the bend, down the way, it was probably about 30 yards. Well, about 30. Yeah, about 30 yards off, right?
Okay.
It wasn't, it took a second to get there. But once it flew in front of my face, it was the wingtip, the right wingtip, because it was heading west.
Okay.
Its right wingtip was 5 feet from my face.
Wow.
So when it was right in front of me, I got a good look at this thing. Unfortunately, I couldn't get like real super fine detail because of how fast it was moving. But I got a good look at what I was seeing. Right, I could see the shape of the wings. I could see that where the feet were or where the legs were. I could see the membrane of the wings. I could see the fact that it was a tail with a flange on the end.
Mm-hmm.
I could see how its neck was curved. And again, as it flew off, I could see it banked, right? It was following the creek around. It banked. I could see the profile. And that it was definitely, like I said, it looks just every bit like a giant heron.
Okay.
Like, I think that is the number one thing that I've really that it has struck me, is how profoundly heron-like they look.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also one of the reasons that they stay so low is they are gliding. It never once flapped its wings that I saw.
Okay.
And in fact, most people, everyone that I've personally spoken with, some people have said they've seen them flapping, so I'm not saying they don't.
Right.
But everyone that I spoke with, they never once mentioned the wings actually flapping, right? I think the reason I saw it, and here's the thing, right? So two of the women I spoke with, who saw them just about less than 10 years ago, they saw it going into the same creek. They were just a couple of miles down the road from where I was, but they were on the highway, and it was going into the creek, but it was only like 10, 15 feet off the deck that they saw it. But it went and dove into the same creek. And another gentleman actually, just a couple of weeks ago, actually reported. At first, he thought it was a humanoid. He's like, dude, if you hear anybody talking about Mothman, let me know. Well, so I think a lot of quote unquote, when people see flying humanoids, I'm not saying that there aren't some legitimate flying humanoids, but I have a distinct feeling that many of them may actually be misidentified pterodactyl or pterosaur. They have a very their body is very humanoid, and if they tuck their heads back and you're looking up at them, mm-hmm. If you don't see them in profile, I can see that being like, yeah, look like a guy. So I think that's what happened. Like, this was just a few weeks ago, and his sighting was less than a mile from where mine was. So I do think that the wings were back, like it was trying to gain speed. But, a bird will tuck its wings and sort of allow it, to gain some momentum.
Sure.
That's sort of what it looked like it was doing. So I think they glide. And I think that's why I saw it, and why I have two other sightings in and around the same creek, right? The creek that I saw it in, it's wide. It's about 15 to 20 feet wide overall. It's stone. It's cut into the limestone bedrock. So it's 15, 20 feet deep, sometimes 30 feet deep in certain places. but it's got these large, very high stone walls. So the air currents are greater. So I think it's riding those currents. And I've gotten several recounts where like before, if it's where there's a thunderstorm, they seem to come out and ride those thermal currents higher. So I do think that they are gliders more than, say, a normal bird, right? Where they're just flying around. I think these things are absolutely gliders, and they rely on air currents like a pelican would. You see them sort of at a certain altitude when over the ocean. Well, they're using those currents, those air currents, to keep them aloft. Mm-hmm. I think these creatures are doing the exact same thing.
And it's interesting you mentioned the thunderstorms. Native American legends depict thunderbirds coming out during storms like this, but not all of the thunderbirds are feathered. They describe them as being pterosaur-like, especially in their totems. You can see clearly, not all totems, but some totems have them depicted as pterosaurs. The horn, the beaks, you're looking at it, you're like, wow, that looks like a prehistoric creature.
Exactly. Yeah, no, and I do think that is absolutely a part of this whole thing, right? In fact, I found 2 different videos from 2 different thunderstorms. I'm going to throw another little piece in here. There were 2 different thunderstorms over 2 different years in and around Cedar Hill, which is right next to DeSoto, and where another gentleman I spoke with who'd seen a very small one twice in and around in a very hilly part of Cedar Hill. And both these videos they call them UFOs. Well, they're lights. They're just before a thunderstorm, but these are very clearly very bright lights, but they're not doing the normal UFO thing where it's like hovering and then disappearing or jetting off in some direction, right?
Bioluminescence.
The lights seem to just sort of meander. And one of them sort of softly blinks out and then reappears, but it's not like somewhere out. It reappears not that far away. It almost looks like if you had tagged a couple of vultures, right, with lights, and threw them up there. That's how they would behave. Well, again, you don't really have vultures doing that. And last time I checked, vultures don't come with spotlights. But
yeah.
So it's like, so what is this? These aren't drones, right? One was like from 2015. Yeah, drones existed, but they weren't popular at the time, and these don't have the normal drone lights. And people don't do drones in front of thunderstorms anyway, because the average speed of a thunderstorm is like 35, 40 knots as far as the air current goes, and you can lose the average drone anything over 10 to 13. Right? Mm-hmm. So these are not drones. What they are, we don't know, but it has long been suggested that the Ropen from Papua New Guinea, which is believed to be a type of pterosaur, can bioluminesce.
Right.
So if it is the case, these creatures can bioluminesce, which I'm not saying that they are, it's just a theory. Mm-hmm. I would not be surprised if those particular unidentified lights are the ramphoractoids utilizing those air currents in front of the storm. Why they do it, I have no clue. Yeah. Right? I couldn't even speculate, but it's entirely possible that they do.
So was this? You said it was a creek or was it a river?
So where I saw them it's a creek.
Okay.
But it drains into the Trinity River.
Okay. So you don't have a problem disclosing the exact location of this?
Oh, no, absolutely. Okay. I have no problem with that at all. It's basically it's in DeSoto where I had it. It was in the 10-Mile Creek in the city of DeSoto, just west of where west of Hampton, but really it's west of I just forgot the name of the street. Because basically the road dead ends right into it. So it's because Hampton is like the main thoroughfare in DeSoto. Basically, it's west of Hampton, going towards Duncanville. That's before, really in between there and Westmoreland, which means none of these names mean anything. But it's like that's where I saw it.
Okay.
But I have an account of two women, actually a mother and daughter, seeing one fly into that creek from I-35, which is further east. And I have an account from one person seeing a similar-looking creature on 2 different occasions in Cedar Hill, which is further east, and the creek had stopped by that point. However, again, where he sees it, it's very, very hilly. Lots of sheer cliffs for them to sort of hang around in. And then even further in Kennedale, which is just south of Fort Worth, I have an account there. Then I have an account from a trucker who saw it in Fort Worth. Right, I mean, just right there off of 820 and I-30.
I think I heard his testimony one time.
Yeah, you have. If you've seen Ken Hovind,
yes.
I actually called Kent on that one. It was like, hey, can I use this one for the book? It's like I've tried to get a hold of the guy, the original person, and unfortunately I just have not been able to get a hold of him. But yeah, I mean and I've got a few other accounts from southern Oklahoma, which is just, North Texas. That's we share a border. So, it's only a few hours north of here that I've got several other accounts. Again, being heard and seen at night, including in front of a thunderstorm. So, these creatures have apparently a broad flight pattern.
Yes, they do. What time was your first sighting again?
About 10, 11 a.m.
That's really early.
Yeah.
Most of these,
yeah. I do think they're nocturnal by and large, but I think something else we kind of need to factor into all of this is that they are cold-blooded. These are reptiles, right? They're not warm-blooded like the theropods were. So they may not need to eat all that often, even though flight does require a lot of caloric intake. These creatures may not be all that active. They may be, they may just be scavengers, and they're just only going out when necessary. If you realize how little something like a crocodile needs to eat, these things aren't very large, and for them to fly, they're not very heavy. So they're not really trying to support the same kind of weight that, say, a crocodile would have to. So they may, even though they're using more calories in flight, they may not need the same, even have, say the same kind of intake as, like, say, a small crocodile. So that then, it begs the question, if they're only eating once or twice a month, what are they doing the rest of the time? Well, for me, I think the fact that, again, where I have a bunch of, I have 3 different accounts in the same creek, and then 2 other accounts are right next to, are in Cedar Hill, where in that area specifically is where we've cut several roads through, right? It's a very hilly, mountainous sort of region. I think that we're fine. I think these things are in caves. I think that, they're reptiles in caves like every other dragon story you've ever heard. I think that they are living in caves.
Yes.
I think that they are looking for high up areas so that they can, basically just, leap from and catch the current and glide. I do think that that the rhamphorhynchoids in particular are related to the wyverns of European mythology, right? I think that's the same creature. So I do think that these things are they probably have some sort of hole, like small caves, small whatever, that they're holding up in, and that's where they live. Look at the Van Meter visitor, right?
Yeah.
Its description was very similar to that of a pterosaur, and the image that is often connected to that wasn't drawn by anyone who actually saw it. I think that's sort of a big problem with most of the whole, cryptozoology thing in general, and going back and looking at old artwork, is that the people who are doing the artwork are never seeing these creatures, in real life. It's someone trying to describe them
Correct.
to them, and oftentimes it's second or third hand, or it's just, or the artist isn't even able to hear from the actual person. It's just being handed to them, and so they're going off of what they think they're being told. A perfect example of that is actually, I would argue, the Jersey Devil.
Yes.
Right?
I was going to mention that.
The image that we have of the Jersey Devil came from a newspaper artist from Philadelphia. And it's like all he did was he took the descriptions that people in New Jersey saw, and he just took it at face value and just drew this creature. He wasn't really capable of, and again, it's one of those things where we take certain things for granted, right? Like the fact that we know what a dinosaur looks like. We have a much broader understanding of nature now than people 100 years ago. So, particularly, these were city dwellers, right? So, I mean, they were just going by what they knew. And the thing is, the artist wasn't a trained forensic artist. I've studied forensic recreation, for police sketches and stuff like that. And the thing that the very first thing you understand is people talk in emotion, and they use what they're familiar with to describe something that's unfamiliar, right?
Correct.
So if he had been he wasn't even talking to these people. He couldn't show them what he was drawing and be like, is this what you saw? So the problem is oftentimes cryptozoologists look at the drawings like, well, that's what we're looking for. And as an artist, I'm looking at them like, there's no way that's what they saw. Right? As an artist, I'm listening to what I'm reading with the accounts where I'm like, that's a pterodactyl.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's a pterosaur, but it's clearly a rhamphorhactoid. They were trying to describe something that they didn't even have words for. And that's a key element here that a lot of people miss, is if you don't have a word for something, right, it becomes very, very difficult to understand or to describe what you see. So I think if you go back and you look at what the eyewitnesses actually say they saw, it is very clearly a rhamphorhactoid pterodactyl and not some weird hybridized deer bat.
Or a demon.
Right.
It's interesting because I have a gal who's going to be coming forward on her eyewitness account of the Jersey Devil. And a lot of people actually believe not to get off subject here, but I was going to mention it for a moment. No. A lot of people believe the Jersey Devil to be some sort of a demon manifesting in physical form. Is that a possibility? Yeah, I think that's a possibility, because if you come from a side of believing and you're of the faith and you believe the Bible to be the truth about certain things of our world and all things about our world, then it's more understandable and you could believe that, because yes, we do know that there are demon entities in physical and in spiritual. But with this one, I'm leaning more towards a Ropen, which is the word I'd like to use for living pterosaurs. Yeah. I do think that most people probably say, whoa, now you're saying we're having misidentification of a creature that most people would say, okay, you're saying you have a misidentification between heron and pterosaur, okay? But now you're saying we have a misidentification of a creature versus a pterosaur, or a monster versus pterosaur. It's like, well, yeah. To put it bluntly, I mean, yes, because like you said, a lot of that information gets misconstrued over time. And is it really what they're seeing? Are they seeing a demonic-looking spirit creature in the form, or are they actually seeing a pterosaur, a rhamphorhactoid of some sort? So yeah, I lean towards that.
So, and that's the thing, right? This is where a lot of things get weird. So, I have several accounts. One was taken by Nick Redfern. It's the famous Sandy Grace incident in and around White Rock Lake, which is in Dallas. Sorry. Apparently, my lungs don't want to work today. Apologies. So she sees a 7-foot-tall goat man, full-blown satyr, backwards-facing legs, covered in hair, horns. It disappears in a flash of light, whole 9 yards, right?
Mm-hmm.
I found that so far, that's the only person who'd ever gone on record as to that they'd actually seen that creature. You can hear legends, right? But it's like the problem with legends is, well, what's real, what's not. I explore a lot of that in the book. I don't want to get too far afield from our conversation, but the point is, I found someone else who verified who had seen the same creature like 10 years earlier. And again, they described it in almost identical ways. 7 foot tall, goat-like horns, backward-facing legs. But then I have these other accounts from people who saw a creature near tributaries off of White Rock Lake, all of them within 3 miles, and they describe something that sounds more like a rake, like it's, again, 7 foot tall, gaunt creature, and yet the simple fact of the matter is these are clearly supernatural things. These are not natural material creatures. But yeah, I mean, and one of them absolutely had a physical impact on a car. So it's one of those things where we kind of have to, when we look at the world around us, we do have to be willing to say, hey, there are physical cryptids, right? That's absolutely true, and these things do need to be explored. They are, I think they're often shoved under the rug because they do cause damage to the Darwinian worldview. Mm-hmm. But then there's also absolutely supernatural creatures that we have to admit exist, and people see them, and they terrify people.
Right.
And those creatures also seem to be able to have an impact on the physical world. It's not just something that's happening in somebody's head.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Well, Jason, I hope I haven't taken up too much of your time, but I love the in-depth information you have provided. It's pretty fascinating and mind-blowing at the same time for all the viewers who are going to be seeing this, and or either listening or watching CCTV, YouTube, Google, Facebook, LinkedIn. I do want to ask you this, though.
Sure.
You were 11 years old when you had this encounter. Yeah. And you said that has impacted your life in a fairly big way, would you say?
Yes, absolutely.
Is this what put you in motion to go and search for the truth?
If you had asked me this even 5 years ago, I would have said no. But I'm no longer so certain. I think I was already kind of there. My father was a mechanic, and he firmly believed that God has no grandchildren. Anything that was if I was to believe something, I couldn't have just gotten it from him. So he always said I could believe whatever I wanted, but I needed to be able to prove it to him first. Mm-hmm. Right? He's like, I don't care what you choose. You choose Buddhism, you choose Hinduism, you choose whatever. But you got to tell me why. You got to show me that it's real. Mm-hmm. And I think that more than anything else, like, I mean, when I was a kid, we'd go down to the Plexi, to the Creation Science Museum down there with Dr. Bob. He took me on one of their excavations, and I know Dr. Bob. We're actually working on a project together. Mm-hmm. I hope to have a little more information on that probably in the next month. Unfortunately, the whole COVID thing threw a lot of things into question.
Same here.
But it's one of those things where it's like, so my path was always kind of there, but I do think that what this did in many ways is it cemented a lot. Because like I said, I spent 20 plus years trying to avoid it and trying not, to rationalize it away. But I do think it was always there. The very first, very terrible book I wrote was about the wyvern, which was the ramfractoid pterodactyl. And even when I wrote that, at the time, it was a very small pamphlet, really. Even at that point, if you had asked me, I would have said, no, I couldn't have possibly seen a pterodactyl because I lived in Dallas, Texas. So it was there. I think it was in the back of my head. But ever since then, it's like I realized I'm way more willing to believe what seem to be fantastic stories, right? Don't get me wrong. When I've heard stories, I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna go with that. No, I'm not saying I believe everything that's brought that someone dropped in my lap, but I'm definitely not going to immediately dismiss things. And I think in many ways, I think it has absolutely shaped a lot of the directions that I've gone. I just didn't realize it at the time, right? I call myself a biblical paranormal researcher because I do believe that while there are a lot of Christians who are interested in this, most don't want to talk about it because they become the weird guy at church. I think others who are in the field don't want to talk about it because they're worried that people will be like, oh, well, they're Christian, and then they don't talk to them. I kind of want to. I like being the voice or a voice in the field, but that's very public. I want people to know, like, look, I have a viewpoint, and I want you to understand that viewpoint absolutely matches with the biblical worldview. I don't have to do anything weird to make it work, both for the non-Christian and for the Christian. I like being able to stand out and say, look, okay, fine, no one else wants to talk about it, I'll do it. Actually, let me phrase it. I hate that. I hate the fact that I'm doing this. In fact, let me be like, it's weird. You know what I really want to do with my life? I want to be drawing Spider-Man. Like, I love comics. I love artwork. I would love to be drawing Spider-Man and that's it, right? That's what I want to do with my life. But the problem that I found is God's like, yeah, you don't get to do that. Because I couldn't look myself in the eye and know that I know what I know, I have the perspective I have, and know that there are so few people out there talking and doing the hard work that I'm like, I couldn't live with myself, right? I mean, there's so few pastors willing to talk about this stuff because they're like, well, we don't want people to think we're crazy. Yeah. Let me help you out here. That ship's already sailed, right?
Here.
It's like here's the problem, right? And again, it's weird. I have my two specialties are at the beginning of the book and the end of the book, right? I do a lot of stuff with prophecy. I do a lot of stuff with creation science. So it's like those are my two. That's my specialty, right? But it's because I care about the middle of the book. I care about the other stuff. That's what I care about. But I'm like, look, the same people who are going to, fall for the Antichrist are the same people who are going to call you crazy for believing in God. So I'm like, why not just tell the truth and let the chips fall where they may? But that's not the world we live in. So I'm happy to be the weird guy out, right? I'm happy to be the guy everyone's like, yeah, he's a little strange. All right, fine. I mean, if that's what I got to do, it's what I got to do, and I'd rather be doing that than get to the end of my life and be like, well, what did I do with my life?
Mm-hmm.
Don't get me wrong, drawing Spider-Man would be awesome, but it wouldn't mean anything.
Right. Just as it was once said, every man is responsible for leaving some sort of what he has taken from this world, leaving a legacy.
Yes.
No, I can definitely tell you, I'm glad that you have chosen to be the weird guy, because there's a lot of us who feel the same way. I do especially, and I want to have that voice to share with others, and that's why I did this. I did this for those who could come forward and speak their mind and tell what's really going on. So it's important that you're heard, and I'm glad you came forward, Jason. Last question for you.
Sure.
This question is, I'd like to ask this one once in a while, but what do you say now to someone, a skeptic, who says, no, that's not what you saw? You had a misidentification. What's your personal feedback to them?
It was 5 feet from my face. That's it. You can believe me or not, that's fine. But it was 5 feet from my face. I know what I saw. And here's the problem. I've got plenty of other people who have seen it. You can write off me as being crazy. Absolutely. But how do you write off the other dozen accounts of people, and not just that they've seen it, but they describe it identically? People I'd never met, right? How do you explain the fact that we all say the exact same thing? That we all see it as this one creature, as, you know, a heron or a crane or a pelican, but then we get close to it. We see it as one thing, but then once we're close enough to actually see it, that's when we recognize it for what it is. How do you explain that? Now, I will say this: I stopped arguing with people. I give them my information. I make my argument, and I'm done. If you don't believe me, that's fine. I don't care. But I am going to tell you the truth. I'm going to give you my argument, and you can do with it as you see fit.
Well said. That should be for everybody.
Yeah.
Excellent. Jason, thank you. Thank you.
I appreciate you calling me. Yeah. No, this is great. I love it.
Yeah, and I know that everybody else who sees this is going to love this video, and they're going to probably, some of them may even consider reaching out to you to let you know, hey, thank you for coming forward. But it is a pleasure to have spoken to you, and an honor. So thank you so much for all that you are doing and that you've chosen to keep up in this research in this field.
What happens if you get a little too close, right? I mean, the Van Meter visitor supposedly had light that it could throw out. I mean, the myth of dragons spitting fire has to come from somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So, but that's a different show.
Yeah, completely. I know I'm going to have you on again. I'd love to hear more, but sooner down the road, or a little bit later down the road, I'll call you again and we'll see about setting something up again. But it was a pleasure, and it's great talking to you, friend. I appreciate it.
Appreciate you, man. You have a good one.
You too. God bless.
Thank you. Bye.
Wow, what a great interview with Jason McLean, and 5 feet from his face. That's pretty amazing. That's something I just don't think you'll ever forget. You know, so we're really grateful of his time and him coming forward to share all the information he has on this network. So if you have had an encounter, like I said before, I urge you to come forward. I promise you, you'll receive no ridicule from me. I'm here to believe you, first and foremost. I understand there are skeptics out there, and a lot of this may be very new to you and just goes right over your head, or you have a lot of questions about it. Well, here's your chance. If you would like to reach out to me, I encourage you to do so. You can find me at ropentracker@gmail.com, ROPEN, tracker@gmail.com. You can also find the Ropen Cryptozoology Network on Facebook. So facebook.com, CryptoGera is where you can find me. So feel free to reach out to me as much as you like. I'll do my best to try to answer all the incoming messages. Like I said, you got an encounter? Please come forward. I'm ready to believe you, and we will take good care of you on this network. So, quite an amazing experience for Jason McLean, and I'm so glad all the information he had available to us. There's a lot there, and it's going to continue to come in. More and more eyewitness encounters are going to pour in, and it's important that we hear from each and every one of them. So, I hope you've enjoyed today's show, and that you tune in for next time, because we're going to have more eyewitness encounters. And stay tuned for some of the creature features we have on this network as well. And if you'd like to come forward and tell of your account, if you have had an experience out of the ordinary, reach out to me. I'm ready for it. I'm ready to hear you. So in the meantime, very important, seek the truth. Keep your eyes on the sky. God bless every one of you on the other side of the screen. I'll see you next time.